It's a new day, and there are new catastrophes for Russia. We see that Russia's eyes across Crimea are going blind. Ukraine is successfully knocking out the radars that allow the Russians to occupy the peninsula. And without those eyes, we see that the missiles and the drones get through. Thereafter, we see the explosions as the fuel burns, and then trains and commerce in the Russian military slow down to a crawl. But there's something else even better. Very exciting news. It appears that the Flamingo has entered the theater of operations. This is a big game changer. Remember, the Flamingo is Ukraine's homemade cruise missile, and we'll dive into all of that. Now, for Russia, there's something else going on that is really difficult. Every day, this war is now costing them $588 million. But the important part? The Kremlin is running out of cash. So we see there are 4 different levers, all squeezing in Moscow at the same time. Defenses are being blinded. Refineries and the power grid are being starved. The Putin dictatorship is tightening control at home. However, there are now partisans fighting against it back in the homeland. And this is all while the regime is desperately trying to vend its lies abroad, trying to paint a picture that all is fine. However, the facts speak for themselves. So though Vladimir Putin tries to project strength, his incredible cowardness, his profound weakness, continue to shine through. My name is Jason Smart here in Kiev, Ukraine, and I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post as well as being a national security advisor. So we see that Ukraine is systematically blinding Russian forces in Crimea. So Russia's bleeding money, and there are more and more pressure on Moscow. These 4 levers that we discussed are all pressing on Moscow at the same time. And as this pressure mounts, something has got to give. So let's look at the first one. Within occupied Crimea, Ukraine's GUR, its military intelligence, is running special missions behind the enemy lines. And their goal there is very simple: to break the radars and the antennas that let Russia see the sky and the sea. Think of these sites as being the eyes and the ears of air defense. When the eyes are broken, missiles and drones can get through. Somehow, the media continues to portray a picture that Crimea will remain occupied. But every one of these attacks makes Russia's positions less defendable. This makes it less possible for Russia to continue its occupation. So by no means is Crimea staying occupied a done deal. Ukraine very much still has the opportunity to liberate Crimea. But let's look at just the past few days. Look at Ukraine's attacks across multiple systems in Crimea. We saw the coastal radar there attacked. We saw the radio telescopes attacked. We saw GLONASS, which is like Russia's GPS, was attacked. Multiple other radar systems were attacked, and the radar that is paired with the S-400 battery was destroyed. With all these down at one time, Crimea's air defense has massive holes in it. They cannot be patched up fast enough. And all of this is allowing more attacks. For example, look at what just happened at the Sakai airfield in Crimea. Ukrainian special operations destroyed an S-300 radar at the Saki airfield. 2 days earlier, a radar from the S-400 system there was struck. Without these radars, nearby launchers lose their targeting support. This means that the reaction time is affected. The consequence is very clear. Air defense units miss more of the incoming missiles and drones. And Russia also wastes more of its own air defense missiles. But there's something more exciting. We saw what is occurring in northern Crimea. In northern Crimea, it appears that the Flamingo missile has now been used. And it appears that an FSB border guard base there, as well as a patrol boat facility, all near Armyansk, were attacked. Now, when you look at the satellite photos, it's very clear that the outpost was destroyed and the ground around it was totally scorched. However, the media doesn't ever pick this up. It never picks up the fact that the Putin regime is so incredibly weak. It always acts as if Crimea is part of Russia, and that cannot change. However, look at the facts for yourself. This is not spin. You can look at the facts objectively and see that Crimea is not a great situation if Putin wishes to keep it as part of Russia, because every day its liberation appears that it is a little bit closer. So help me get this news to more people. please just do something simple. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with others, and consider becoming a channel member today. This all helps me get the truth about Ukraine's war against Russian aggression to more people. So let's look at what else is going on. And I think this is very interesting. It's not just the Ukrainians who are wreaking havoc across Russia. There are also insurgent partisans. Consider this, the Atesh movement, the one that we've shown you videos of before, attacking relay cabinets and other facilities inside of Russia. They've released some more footage, and that shows in what bad state the Black Sea Fleet really is. It also exposes there are huge holes in the rear area. We see that within Russia, there are Russians fighting against the system. But this new video that's come out, what it shows us is that the Black Sea Fleet, it has a ton of outdated as well as immobile vehicles. They also report and they show evidence that there's a lack of spare parts, huge problems making repairs, and very low readiness. This all proves that Ukraine is able to fight back because Russia does not have the capacity to withstand it. Russia does not have the capacity to respond fast in a crisis. So every one of these attacks by Ukraine is putting more pressure on Moscow. But there's something else going on as well. It is the economy of the Russian Federation itself. The Russian Federation is in a disastrous situation. Consider this. Since early 2024, more than 100 attacks have halted at least 17% of Russia's refining capacity. That's about 1.1 million barrels per day. That's a lot of gasoline and fuel that will not be created. And that pattern is quite deliberate. We see that Ukraine is going after and hitting some of the same plants again and again to make sure that they are permanently taken offline. For instance, look at the facility for oil refining in Tuapse that has been hit 4 times. The one in Syzran hit 5 times just in 2025. Look at the one in Volgograd. We see that it has been attacked again and again, and now there has been suspension of all use of the facility. These cumulative attacks are having a dramatic effect on the Russian economy. This is not small. This is serious. These are major setbacks for Russia. Look at the attack just yesterday on the facility at Kubyshev. That oil refinery looks like it is going to be offline for a very long time. Russia doesn't have the parts or the means to fix these facilities right now. And that's why many of these facilities simply are stated as being offline with no clear schedule to get back online. This is all in addition to the overall attacks on the energy infrastructure of Russia. We saw that Ukraine was able to successfully attack the Kropotkin substation. Now, why that's important, why that's such an interesting facility, is that it feeds the regional grid, and it's key for the rail junctions there. Once again, the objective for Ukraine has always been the same, to make it impossible for Russia to wage war. By going after the logistics and the things that support the logistics, Ukraine is making that a reality. And every single day, the Russian military is slowed down more and more, and the expense of moving becomes higher and higher. Now, let's keep in mind, though, that Ukraine is simply adding gas to a burning dumpster fire that we call Russia. Look at the simple instability for the entire industries that exist within Russia. Look what happened inside of Moscow. We see that a warehouse and chemical plant there, the fire spread across 4,000 square meters. That's 40,000 square feet. That's amazing. We've seen that they've had to bring in things like the Mi-8, the Ka-32, the helicopters, in order to fight the blaze. But the blaze continues burning. And it is truly incredible during the course of this war, watching Telegram often, how often you see massive fires in Moscow. And it's not just once or twice. It's at least a couple times a week. As this continues, you realize Russia seems like it's really got some problems. And this is all before Ukraine started attacking them. Internally, Russia is just a mess. It is not comparable to a European country. Its corruption has allowed things like chemical factories to have regular fires because everybody just pays off the inspectors. The laws don't work. This is all the undoing of Russia. These cheating the rules for so many years and is now coming back with vengeance. And today we are seeing that Russia cannot even keep its own self together. But there's something else going on. And that is Russia's response to this. We see that Russia cannot respond to the Ukrainian attacks. It can't do something similar. The attacks that it carries out within Ukraine are quite frequent, but there's nothing here that is ultimately going to challenge Ukraine's ability to fight back. Nothing that will change the war. However, Ukraine destroying Russia's ability to refine fuel, that's a pretty big deal, because you need that to continue fighting a war. But Russia can't do the same thing to Ukraine. So the Russian authorities, lacking other options, are now forcing things like Max onto people's phones. As you know, Max is the device for messaging. It's promoted by the state and forced on people's phones by the state. But the real reason they're putting it on everyone's phones is so they can monitor them. But the Russian government is now becoming obsessed with the topic of monitoring them. For instance, now if you have a VPN, which hides your IP address, there is a fine for it of 500,000 rubles. That's $6,250. Now we see that within Moscow, migrants must register and have a tracking app with geolocation on their phones. They want to be able to watch everybody in real time. This is because they have no ability to actually make things better. So they have to clamp down harder on their own people. The state has something else going on, though. It's become very hard up for cash. And we see that in, for instance, the state fees for motorists. There has been an increase of 300% in the fees they charge them. The cost of a driver's license, it has doubled. And this might seem small, this might seem unimportant, but couple that with something else. The government is trying to prevent people from taking money out of ATMs. It is passing new laws to prevent people from taking their money out of the bank. So what does this really mean? It really means that the state doesn't have enough cash. The state is worried. So it's charging you more for basic services, but it's also preventing you from taking your own money. The state is not just Orwellian. The state is also broke. But let's consider that Orwellian side of it. So right now, we see that children as young as 6 now face regular checks for the ability to give birth. This is necessary, the state says, in order to help with their population crisis. It's really just extreme social engineering, but this is what Russia looks like today. We see that they're cutting things like English language instruction in schools and replacing it with things like this cult of Russia traditional values, which instead will fill children's minds. So within Russia, the government has no answer, has no solution. But if you just keep telling the population that they are special, they are Russian, maybe it will convince them. Maybe then they won't notice the large explosions on a regular basis carried out across their country. This is how the Russian government responds. It tries to sell Kool-Aid to its own population, but also tries to do it abroad. We see that Vladimir Putin can't accept what a bad situation he is in. We see at the SCO summit that Putin continued to blame a Western coup for the crisis in Ukraine. He somehow forgot that the crisis exists because he invaded the country. The Russians are just full of lies, though, at this point. There's nothing to look forward to. The overall situation is very bad. Just look at this. I noticed this morning in the news and thought it was quite funny. RIA Novosti, which is government-affiliated news, claims that the Big Mac index shows that the ruble is one of the most undervalued currencies in the world. In fact, it argues that the value of the ruble should not be where it currently is, close to 90 to the dollar, but should actually be closer to 24.5 to the dollar. And that sounds really interesting. But how did they come to that conclusion? Well, we have to understand that the Big Mac index, it's a quick purchasing power proxy that compares the local prices of a Big Mac to its U.S. price to infer an implied exchange rate. So if the burger costs less than in local currency than it costs in the U.S., then it means the currency appears undervalued. But the reality is a little bit different. McDonald's left Russia in 2022, so there is no valid Russia entry in the current index. That figure of 24.5 is being laundered through a familiar brand, McDonald's, to make it look like Russia is not only part of a global trend, but that Russia has things like McDonald's, which it doesn't. But this is not new. We see this irregularly. Russia tries to wash its reputation with international organizations. They do things like use the IMF. The IMF allows countries to self-report data. So they report data saying their economy is doing great. And then they report to the world that, look, the IMF says our economy is doing great. They fail to mention that they are the ones that supplied that data. Routinely, we see them do things like swap out the GDP for PPP and these sorts of things. They do it in order to make it look like Russia is fine. They say that Fitch Solutions says that the economy is growing. What we usually cite, though, is not Fitch Solutions. It's Fitch Ratings. There's a big difference. Fitch Solutions is the research and data arm that publishes market and country analysis. But Fitch Ratings, that's the credit rating agency. That's the one that assigns credit ratings. But by trying to confuse these two, by trying to mix them, they hope that people will not notice that they are using a sleight of hand. But overall, we see that the Russian government loves these sorts of games. It loves to use stuff at the UN or UNESCO and some sort of procedural text that they reframe to say that Crimea has been recognized as being part of Russia. But that is all false. So if you ever want to catch Russian propaganda, here's how you do it. Just check this out. Think about the source itself. Did the institution actually publish this? Are these really their words on those dates? Or is there a metric? Are they just replacing a metric like PPP for GDP or vice versa? Or the input? Do the tables rely on Russia's controlled data? Or is there actually any transparency? However, laws don't change something very simple. The Kremlin might like to try to trick people, to manipulate them, but the fact remains the same. Crimea cannot see, which means that Ukraine can hit more targets with fewer losses. If refineries and substations stay down, Russian fuel and trains slow. Missions are canceled. And if the Kremlin must police its own people even harder, it means that it has fewer tools to fix real problems. So now we have propaganda replacing prestige, and facts are simply not on the Russian side. We see that Crimea is rapidly becoming a trap, and that these four different levers are putting ever more pressure on Moscow. So when you hear that things are going just fine in Russia, be assured, they are not. Every day, we are yet one day closer to a Putin-free world. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, share it with others, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comments below. I am excited to read them. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.